The time is 9:04, and we will call this meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board to order. Today is Friday, May 10th, 2024. I welcome everyone in at this very busy time of year. Mr. Eichelberger will lead us in the pledges.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one indivisible.
We will now have a roll call.
Chair Sarah Oates.
Present.
Martha Gallagher Lynch.
Present.
Mark McNally.
Present.
James Bolton.
Present.
Rolando Castro.
Present.
John Eichelberger.
Present.
Paula Escalante Castillo.
Present.
Stephanie Robinson.
Present.
Lisa Spruce.
Present.
Thank you. That takes us to agenda item number 3. I would like to note that if there are visitors who wish to speak, they must complete a public meetings comment slip outside of the front door here or to the desk at my left, which for today, for the very first time, is not occupied by Dion Frederick because our colleague and dear friend passed away a few days ago unexpectedly. Dion's bright spirit and calming presence graced this agency for over 16 years. Her unofficial title was the coordinator of all things. So every board member, past and present, got to know Dion and work with her personally. I know as deeply as we all feel this shocking loss that those that she worked with on a daily basis not only lost a colleague, but lost a special friend. And so I know Chelsea Buchholz would like to say a few words.
We'll see how this goes, y'all. We can't start today any other way but to acknowledge the whole here with the passing of Dion Frederick. I think it was easier to talk at my own mom's funeral because it was okay to cry there. She's the person you all most likely encountered more often than anyone else from our agency, at least as you planned travel and made plans to come to these meetings. She attended to every detail. Her death on Tuesday was shocking and saddening to us all. 43 years old, having just celebrated a birthday at the end of last month. She recently scurried around helping her daughter with last-minute details for prom. We know the loss her family is experiencing is incomparable, but we grieve with them. As Chair Oates said, she worked here for 16 years across departments, including in the enforcement division and then ultimately in the executive division. She handled all public information requests for the agency. Her span of influence went far beyond what you experienced her to do, and she had many friends here. She took her job very seriously, working ahead and working hard. I never worried about whether she was getting her job done. Heck, I never even worried about the fact that I didn't know all of the things she did. She just got her stuff done. She worked as though she had something to prove, even though we all trusted her explicitly, and she had proven herself long ago. I wanted to share a couple of comments from those who've worked with Dion for some time. Contact Center Manager Amy Jasper had this to share. I remember my first day with the agency over 15 years ago and having the opportunity to work with Dion. She had that sparkle in her eye and an absolute wonderful laugh. I would hear that wonderful laugh down the hall and go seek her out. Sometimes that was just the boost that was needed to get me through a rough day. You could not be down or grumpy when Dion's presence was near. Even at her most stressed or if she felt overwhelmed, she was still able to laugh and have a positive impact on those around her. Another staff member noted that her phrase for almost anything was cool beans. That was her response to a lot. Tessa Stowell, program coordinator for the enforcement division, shared this. I worked with Dion in the same department from the day she started. We hit it off right away. Dion was very easy to talk to, and since we were very close in age, we had a lot in common. We would often go to lunch together or run an errand on our lunch break and share stories about our families and our struggles and whatever else was on our minds at the time. Tessa goes on, Dion was very bright and working to better herself, if for nothing else but to give the best life to her daughter, Kayla. I admired how confident she was in everything she did, no matter the task. She had the best advice and delivered it calmly. She was a great coworker and a huge asset to this agency, but most importantly, a great friend. We all agree that she was loyal and devoted. That was evident to me when I let staff know of her passing. We set up a GoFundMe page to support her daughter. And in about 10 minutes, we reached our goal of $1,000. And in an hour, we had reached $3,000. Yesterday, we were at $5,000, and now we're up beyond $6,700. This is a testament to who Dion was, but I think she would hate this. She did not like attention, and above all else, she was self-sufficient. But there's nobody in the world that she loved as much as her daughter, Kayla. And so, if there's anything we can do to honor Dion, it's to provide something to Kayla. So thank you for your own contributions to that effort. Dion did not dwell on much of anything. She powered on, and she was exceptionally strong. And so we take her example today, we power on, and we get to the business of the day. But we do so with a very heavy heart.
Thank you, Chelsea. As you were speaking about Dion, I was thinking that this is a recorded meeting and how awesome it would be for her daughter one day to be able to hear these words when she's, in a space to do that. And then I thought the person that I would have asked to make sure that that happened would have been Dion. And so we will have to figure out who takes her place so that we can provide that with her daughter. Those were beautiful words. Thank you. I know that all of our thoughts are with her daughter and her family right now. I understand that a board meeting today might feel a little bit unimportant, but to honor Dion's dedication to this agency running smoothly, we must power on, and so we will get to it. We have not received any requests for public comments today, correct? So we will move to agenda item number 5, the ratification of the official record of the February 23, 2024 board meeting as approved for posting on the website by the Secretary of the Board that can be found starting on page 7 in our materials. We will hear any changes, and if there are none, a motion.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton.
I move that we accept the meeting minutes for our previous meeting.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mr. McAnally. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item number 6 is the final orders and surrenders in 2 enforcement matters. These are on page 11 in your materials. We did not receive any requests to speak on either of these items, and no action is required from the board. However, if there are any questions about these. Hearing none, I will move on to agenda item number 7, the report by Enforcement Committee. Mr. Bolton, these materials are on page 26. Do you have anything that you would like to bring to our attention?
We had a very large meeting, at least for the Enforcement Committee. But I think that the report, which Dion drafted, I think it speaks for itself.
Thank you, sir. For those of you that recall at our last board meeting, we talked about a specific item that we were kind of grappling with as an agency. And so, as Mr. Bolton said, that there was a lot of public participation in that Enforcement Committee meeting. And I think ultimately we decided that no action, that the committee was not going to recommend any further action by the board. So that's sort of where that landed for those of you who were not able to participate. Agenda item number 8 is the report by the Executive Committee. This is on page 29 in our materials. So I will just say we approved a few new applicants for our volunteer appraiser reviewer program. And we also talked about our workshop policy. As you all might recall, we have an annual workshop as part of our policy, and it's the day before the November board meeting, and we talked about whether or not we should make that as needed or every other year, and just sort of decided that to keep it the way it is every year, and if it's not needed, then we can do that on a case-by-case basis, but sort of felt like an as needed might mean that it never happens. So we decided to leave it as it was, as the policy as it was. Any questions about the Executive Committee report? If not, Ms. Robinson, page 31 has our Budget and Finance Committee report. If you have anything you would like to highlight for us?
Nothing in particular at this point. I appreciate the staff for doing a great job in preparing for that committee meeting, and there are a couple items that came up that we'll be reviewing today for the fiscal 2025 initial draft of the budget. So I just ask that everyone take a look at that, and that is a process, so it's going to be over the next couple months that we'll actually make changes and finalize it. But if you guys could take a look at that to make sure you give your input, that would be appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 10 is the report by the TREC and TALC Joint Audit Committee, and I am currently serving on that committee. Mr. Bolton was originally, and then Mr. McAnally stepped in for him, and now I'm the TALC rep there. The report is on page 33 in our materials, and we're basically just kind of talking about finishing up the fiscal year 24 audits, and talked about that we will start planning the fiscal year 25 audits. And so if anything, ever comes up that any board member feels like it's an area that we need to kind of dig into and make sure that things are on track, we're always open to suggestions about what can be audited. Agenda item number 11, staff reports on agency operations initiatives and statistical data. Executive Director Buckholz. This is the summary is on page 35 in our materials.
I'm going to be very quick on this one. First, I should have introduced to you Amber Hinton, who is acting as our recording secretary today. Amber has that same role on the commission side and knows the drill. Though we realized today that we had a little different style on the commission and the board side. Very importantly, I switched seats with Kathleen on the commission meetings. I don't know why. Different style between Dion and Amber. Wow. Thank you, Amber, for being here. Earlier this week, we returned from a weekend in Nashville for the Aero Conference. Melissa Tran, Kathleen Santos, Summer Mandel, and myself were the staff representatives, and Mr. Bolton and Ms. Robinson represented the board. You have this item on your agenda to talk about takeaways from that conference, but as far as what the staff took away, I wanted to just mention a few things. First is that it's always nice to be with other state regulators who are addressing some of the issues in the industry that, of course, we also are facing. Appraisal bias, by no surprise, continues to be a hot topic. I'm proud that Texas is the leader in many regards, but particularly with our partnership with the Texas Workforce Commission Civil Rights Division. We together, as you know, investigate complaints alleging bias. This was discussed at the conference, and I leaned over to Melissa Tran and said, "Do you want to say something?" And she said, "No, everyone has heard from me on this." And not 2 minutes later, someone stood up and said, "Can we please hear from Melissa Tran?" She continues to be a resource for others who are interested in implementing similar programs in their states. She also was pulled aside by another state and asked about our mentorship program. So in many respects, Texas is a leader, and I want to commend Melissa and Kat and the board for leading the charge on that. Another common discussion centered around reconsiderations of value, or ROVs. Fannie Mae has created some new guidelines for ROVs with clear expectations for lenders and appraisers and borrowers. This will be a great opportunity for us to share that information with consumers and just communicate about this to the public so that they understand what it looks like to conduct an ROV. But we expect first to talk about this at the committee level in more detail and kind of unpack that. Aero is always a learning experience for me. I learn more about this industry and how to regulate it. And this trip was no different, so I'm grateful for the opportunity. A few more updates. The ASC audit, last month the ASC came to town and did its regular audit of us. We expect that to be, it was a positive experience. We do not have any sort of official results just yet, but expect that in a few weeks. And so we'll be in touch with y'all on that. Also from the ASC is, of course, the grant opportunity, and the deadline for that is, the first deadline for that is in June. We will take advantage of that June opportunity and submit an application by that deadline, and expect to hear the results of that the following month in July, and then expect awards to be issued in August. Our application will focus on stipends for those entering the industry. But we're also examining other things that we might add to that to make sure that we capitalize on that grant to the full extent of its, we want to be able to collect $120,000 a year, which is the most we can collect. Lastly, and more global in perspective, is our RAMP project, the database replacement project that you will remember is funded by TREC, but something we will all benefit from. It looks like this project will not conclude by the end of the calendar year. We remain on budget, but we are delayed as we work through just the complex licensing and education and enforcement processes that will allow us to really maximize automation. There's a tension I have observed between the old quote of, don't let, perfection is the enemy of good, but then also this drive to get the most out of what is a multi-million-dollar project that will affect every corner of our agency for years to come. Does time drive or does quality drive? And the answer is yes. With quality probably winning out just a hint more than time, but that will ebb and flow, I think. So, as a leader of this project, I am working to keep spirits high, keep motivation strong, and to get that tension correct. But TBD on how that, it is going to be a great database. I will let you know as soon as I know when implementation will be, but I do not know when that will be.
And our current database is available until we no longer need it.
It's that database we call Versa,
Right.
And it continues to work for us with glitches. I will receive emails occasionally. Versa is down, and that means that when someone calls and says, I need this information about my license, that information cannot be found. I mean, it halts us. So it's good that we're replacing that system, but it continues to work for us in, I will say, clunky fashion.
Okay.
That's the official term. Any questions for me?
Just one comment. I can relate to the new database. We got one a couple of years ago, but even though it's supposedly off the shelf, our business model, like yours, is so different from the private sector that it took about 1.5 years of building before we could get into beta phase. And then we did a short beta phase of 60 days and everything was working, and then we moved forward.
You give me hope.
Well, the last challenge is data migration.
You nailed it.
I just had a question real quick. On the rent project, I know that Trek is covering the cost of that. On the commission side, do we have any board or committee that is designated to monitoring the progress of the implementation? And if so, what is their involvement?
Did you ask about like a board member? Or
The
just
commission,
staff?
anyone on the commission, on the Trek commission side, do they have a committee or something like that working with you guys?
Yes. Our executive team and then our division directors are all intimately involved with basically building the system. Long ago, we established the requirements of the system, and now we are working on, I've forgotten the term that they use, but basically making sure that what Acela is building for us fulfills our needs in the best of ways. And so Melissa Tran is working on that for licensing and enforcement for the board side, because she and her team are the ones who will use that system. So I don't know how much time Melissa has spent on this, but she and I have talked about it enough. I think she probably dreams about it at night. So yes, to the extent that the board, the staff will use that system, they are the ones who are doing the work on it.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then great news on the grant coming up. That'll be great. And then you'll be going through the other areas of the staff reporting? Because I just had some questions on those.
Bring them on, right?
Oh. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but is it okay if I, okay, so I know on page 35, that is where we are, I believe, and I apologize, I'm a little scattered today, but Customer Service Relations Division looks great. I did have a couple comments on the Education and Examination Division. It shows, let's see here, what I wanted to see if as a committee, if we could pass this to our next committee meeting. I noticed on the pass rates that it has been declining in certain areas, and that's a little bit of a concerning issue. I know as a committee, we have really been keeping our eye on that. And so I want to make sure that we continue to do that. And I apologize, I'm trying to open up my notes from last night. So as a committee, if we could follow up on the decline and pass rate numbers, that would be great as a discussion item. And then also during Aero, I briefly heard from a representative from California in one of our sessions, and what she identified within the last 4 weeks is that her numbers were declining pretty severely as well. And so she did some investigation and found out that the provider was actually, they actually made an error in reporting. And it was a significant error that had the California numbers really, really down, but once they investigated it and resent those numbers, they realized it was much higher than what they anticipated. So that may be a follow-up item for our committee meeting, is if we can, I have a conference call that I will be scheduling with her in the next coming couple of weeks, I hope, and to get more information on how she discovered that and where they are. But that may be something we want to look at. If we're seeing this type of a decline, who knows, perhaps it's a mistake in reporting on from outside of our agency.
Absolutely.
So that I wanted to put on the table. And then also, let's see, also with that same situation that was brought up at Aero from the representative from California, it was during the AQB meeting, so AQB is going to be investigating that as well. And so that's, again, very recent, but I think it's worth us looking into, particularly with our numbers going down. Let's see, also, my notes. And then of course, we'll bring that back to the board if we have any significant findings from the committee level. Oh, I did have a question in education. In terms, something that came up in Arrow was online versus in-person training, right? And some people accept it, some people don't. So on our online courses that we are approving, do we have, I know we have traditional in-person, I know we have online courses. Do we have hybrid as well?
So hybrid being like a Zoom and,
Where they're, yeah, where they may have some in-person and then some online, a little bit of, just a mixture of both.
in a single course? Not so much.
Okay.
I don't see that. They're typically either, now the AQB and distance education certification are now reviewing and approving courses that are synchronous
Okay.
online,
Okay.
which would be your Zoom course.
Okay.
Right? So that's been a step in that direction. But typically we see, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, it's a day.
Yes.
But typically, we see one or the other.
Okay.
That's not to say that we couldn't, but right now,
That's
we
what we're
typically see one or the other. And probably, maybe that's something I can bring back to the Education and Licensing Committee. If you're interested, I can try to see if we can bring numbers, like how many are online versus classroom.
I think, yeah.
What I probably won't be able to do because of a system limitation is distinguish between classroom traditional and classroom Zoom,
Okay.
because that's, we consider those the same thing in our
Right.
current database.
Right. Okay.
But I'm happy to bring that back to
I
the
think-
Education Committee if you think you'd be interested in.
That would be a good thing on the committee level for us to dig deeper into. And then another thing that came up in Arrow at the conference was, I guess, the quality of online courses. So I would be interested maybe on a committee level to talk deeper about how are we approving online versus traditional?
Okay.
What are we looking at in terms of what makes an effective course for each of those? Because I'm of the belief that approving a traditional course and an online course, it should be very different because they are taught differently. The instructors interact differently. The
Right.
assignments, so forth. So I'd like to see maybe on a committee level, what is our process on approving each of those types of courses? What are we looking at? Just to see if there's some opportunity for improvement there, especially on online, because there was a lot of complaints at the conference, not complaints, but suggestions on maybe we need to either get rid of online courses or maybe do something with those because it
Sure.
wasn't very well accepted. But I believe we should have them. I believe that we should have that option, especially for accessibility and options for others and lowering the barrier to entry and so forth. So I would like to see that information on the committee level so we can dig a little deeper and make
do
sure
that.
that we're approving courses that are extremely effective for our Texan, for our appraisal trainees and continuing education for the appraisers.
So I will tell you, just high level, is that all of our qualifying courses, pre-licensed courses, those have to be approved by the AQB.
Okay.
They require distance education certification as well. And I can bring that process
That'd be great.
forward to you at the committee level. The only courses that we review independently are going to be the elective continuing education courses, and we'll review that content. But yeah, just
That would be
to
awesome.
get that little high-level
Just so
snip,
happy-
and
yeah.
then we can certainly dig in at the committee level.
That would be great. I appreciate that. Just looking at my notes here. Okay. All right. So I think that's all I had on the education questions. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, and again, this could be committees level stuff and then we'll of course bring it to the board if we have any findings.
Martha Gilded?
I had a question too, maybe that we could look at the education online versus in person and see how it correlates with the pass-fail numbers. Maybe there is some way to sort that out so that we can see if one or the other is better or has better results.
Yeah, I'll see what I can find in that regard. I feel like we may have looked at that at the committee level, but a few years
Okay.
ago. I'll see what information I'm able
Thank you.
to gather and bring that.
That's a great suggestion, to see the effectiveness of each style. And that actually came up in the conference I keep referencing, also dealing with Perea, right? And that's one of the things that AQB will be, or not AQB, but that the appraisal group will be monitoring is going to be the pass rates of that program to determine the effectiveness. So that's a great point, if we can get that information.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Robinson, that's such a great question that I sort of feel like I haven't seen the forest for the trees over all these years looking at these pass rates, to consider the education, and then hearing, of course, that the AQB has to approve all of the qualifying education, which is what we're seeing in these, continuing ed. We don't track any, data about that. There's no exam for that. And maybe why we have not ever considered going to the, we've always said there's nothing we can do about it, but of course we could go to the AQB and say, maybe what you're approving isn't quality education, and that's reflected in these nationwide pass rates that Texas is.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think that's the biggest thing, is if several of our states are seeing this huge decline in our test numbers, we need to pick that torch back up and kind of dig a little deeper. So I think that's right. We can always go back to AQB and say, hey, let's reevaluate this. Something is happening where our numbers are going down. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I'm remiss that we never considered that.
I think we all agree that in-person classes are probably better as far as retaining the information, learning what you need to know.
I would disagree, sir. As a learning technology specialist for online courses.
But I think whatever platform is obviously good enough for some.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, when you see the first time test takers pass rate is 84%,
yeah.
there's certain people that are just struggling and having to take it over and over. So, yeah. Right.
That's my only point.
Well, and plus,
chance, by the way, it's a good option.
The other thing that I think that Jennifer will have her hands full with this, but it was a discussion we were having I had with others before the meeting. Being an expert on having trainees, I will tell you that the profile of the current trainee, they're comfortable taking online courses as well as they are for the traditional courses. The traditional courses are way more expensive. And so talking about lowering barriers to entry, I mean, the online provides that. I have some that they finished up their last year at universities under virtual environments. And so we need to also think about that. And also, there is a difference. Even when back in the Stone Age, were taking exams, there's a difference between the test and what the educators can provide you. There is an art to taking a test. I will say that. And once you get that in your head and you can get the reasoning behind the question, then you have a high success rate. I've had very intelligent trainees not pass the first go-around. And so it's just a learning curve that the trainees have to get on behind them too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and of course, in a state as big as Texas that has so much rural area, we certainly don't want to limit anybody's ability to, especially in those underserved areas. That's where we need appraisers, so we don't, want to put up that barrier that they can't do online training. And of course, we don't have say-so when it's an AQB approval.
I'm only here to see if you have additional questions and who we should call up next.
I'm so sorry.
No.
I really studied my notes yesterday.
That's good. That's the reason we're here.
But please, Madam Chair, if it's okay, I had questions on the licensing stuff too, but I will.
No, yeah,
wait.
absolutely. Jennifer, I think I do recall that we at some point tried to dig into online versus in person. I know it was a huge effort because we don't have that information just readily available, and some people had been trainees for 10 years, so going back to see all of their education over all the years was a huge undertaking. But if we didn't share that information with the AQB, then perhaps we should, even if it's older data. I think that's important. Let's not go make that undertaking again, I don't think, if we have meaningful information already.
Did you anticipate my question?
Good morning. I don't know.
Good morning.
Let's see if I could reach your mic.
Just on the licensing division section of the, again, on page 35, we are seeing a decline in terms of applicants, right? And that's something that we've discussed on the committee level. And I believe we discussed this, and I apologize if I'm repeating this, but I would like to see perhaps maybe your team and Renata's team to work together in terms of seeing how that looks on our financial projections, because if we're declining in those applications, that affects revenue and so forth. And so maybe, again, in the next committee meeting, if we can really dig a little deeper on what we really think that's going to do to our end of fiscal year numbers, if anything. What I also noticed, too, in the staff reports is we did see I believe it was, a 33% decline or something like that, ish. But what I also noticed is that the prior year seemed like an anomaly. It seemed like it was so high, but if you look at our numbers this year in comparison to the years prior, taking that 1 year out, we actually are not that far off in terms of where we should be on applicants. So it seems like we're seeing a major decline, but that's only because we're looking at last year's numbers. But either way, though, if we can, from a budget perspective for this fiscal year as we close out, if there's a way for us to just make sure we're not going to have a hit revenue-wise, if there's any type of way to work through the projections on that, that would be good, just so we can, if we need to adjust expenses, so forth, whatever, to end the year positive, that would be good.
Yes.
So that was the thing I wanted to bring up just as a follow-up for the committee. And then, yep, that was my thing on licensing.
That was easy.
So,
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because we hovered around 66,000 to 6,500 or 6,400 for a lot of years.
Right.
And so even though we're at 6,900 now, we were at 7,100 for most of last year. So it's not like a huge decline. And I think we've sort of talked about that, a decline in trainees, but an increase in the others, which means that our trainees are turning into licensed and certified appraisers, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And if I do recall in the budget, I think our projections are a little bit lower than our 2023, which we have to compare odd years and even years. So I think it looks like maybe we have accounted for that, but it's always something that, especially with the Perea uptake, to see how that's going to impact our revenue.
Madam Chair.
Mr. McAnally.
Also, we haven't run that report in a long time. I think Tony did that once. But I think we need to keep in mind, hopefully for every exit, there's an entry into the labor market, but the appraiser profession in Texas is an aging workforce. And so you're going to see more departures than you are going to see entries. And so that may be a budget item or a budget factor that we need to consider.
Yeah. And then we also need to look at, too, I didn't think about it, perhaps when we made our budget last year, did we base that on, and I just can't recall right now, did we base that on last year's numbers in terms of the heightened applicants? No, we looked at 3 years. We did. We averaged it. You're right. Yeah, we averaged it. So yeah, so that's good. And then speaking of finance, I noticed, based on our committee meeting, we were already aware, but just for the board, we are slightly off in terms of the projected revenue that we should have collected at this point. So I don't know if we can speak to, just to inform the board of what we talked about in our committee, why we see that offset. Why are we below where we should be in terms of revenue, and then what we anticipate on seeing to make that up. And again, this was shared at the committee level, but I think it's good for the board to be aware as well.
Good morning. Yes, as we discussed during the budget committee meeting, we are seeing a little lower revenue collection at this point, and it's historically that's what we see. So winter, fall months are slower collection periods. Spring, summer, we typically see an uptick in revenue. This data was as of March, so that was the beginning of spring. So between March and the end of the summer, we'll typically see more revenue collection. And so
the expectation is that by the end of fiscal year, we should be in good shape from a revenue perspective, as budgeted.
As budgeted, but we're going to definitely keep an eye on it and just see if we see any anomalies, and definitely let you know.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
It's interesting.
Any other staff reports? Okay, very good. Agenda item number 12 is an executive session, and I don't have any needs for that. General counsel does not either, unless anybody from the board has anything that falls under that. We will move to agenda item number 13. Discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC 153241, sanctions guidelines. Good morning, Mrs. Santos. This is on page 67 in our materials.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. Kathleen Santos, your general counsel. As you mentioned, this begins on page 67 of your materials. The proposed amendments before you today add additional factors that may be considered in determining the disposition of a complaint. Those factors are: one, whether an appraisal or the conduct at issue was investigated by another governmental agency, and two, the likelihood of the same or similar conduct occurring again. The proposed amendments also allow for greater flexibility in sanctions for those with a first-time level 2 violation. Staff's recommendations here is to authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 22 TAC 153.241 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for the proposal. And I'm available for any questions.
We covered this at the enforcement committee meeting. I think I still would like for Director Tran to just kind of give us a little bit of an explanation on these. I just want to make sure that we understand what we're trying to do here.
Okay, so this was something that we brought to the enforcement committee meeting because we wanted to open up the penalty matrix to allow for dismissals with warnings in situations where we find serious deficiencies. The penalty matrix, the way it is now, requires us to do at least a contingent dismissal. So over these past 2 or so years that we've been doing the PIC, a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from the PIC that staff agreed with was the appraisers seem that through this enforcement process, they've learned. They've done a reconsideration of value, they've fixed their report, they've gotten the extra training. So it seems harsh and doesn't go towards consumer protection to require them to do a contingent dismissal if they've already remediated.
Yeah.
So that's where this
That's
recommendation came from.
Thank you for refreshing my memory on that.
That was a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Stand behind that.
Does anybody else have any questions about this agenda item? And if not, then I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve staff's recommendation.
I second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Director Tran. Agenda item number 14 is the discussion and possible action to propose review of 22 TAC Chapter 155 rules relating to standards of practice and Chapter 157 rules relating to practice and procedure. Ms. Santos, this is on page 74.
All right, this is the quadrennial rule review item. I know everyone's been waiting on this for at least 2 years, maybe longer. So Texas law requires state agencies to conduct a review of its existing rules at least every 4 years to determine whether the reasons for initially adopting the rules still exist. So after review of all the rules within these chapters, you will either repeal, readopt, or readopt with amendments. If you recall, at the conclusion of the last rule review, the plan was to move towards more of a rolling calendar. In the past, we'd reviewed all our rules in a single calendar year, which it's really hard to give everything the attention that it's due when you do it that way. And so the plan was we're actually starting 2 years early for these chapters, but we're going to get on a schedule where we're only reviewing 1 or 2 chapters in a single calendar year, and that will just continue, and we'll stay on that 4-year schedule for each of those sets of chapters that we'll be reviewing in that year. Again, the process is similar to rulemaking. We open up the chapter, we accept comments. At the August meeting, we'd bring any proposed rule changes or any repeals, and then have that open for notice and comment, then people can come in by the next meeting. That's when those would be up for adoption. Those proposed amendments would be up for adoption, and then we'd close rule review for the chapter, just to kind of give you a sneak peek at what's ahead.
Does that process start in the committee? I can't remember.
And what we've done is every sort of rule, filter it through the committee, if there's anything that needs to be changed, and then get the committee to review that particular set.
Thank you.
Is there any review by staff before it comes to the committee level? So I would think, if it's
100%.
education, then, yeah, okay.
Absolutely. This is, we're coming to you with recommendations and not, here's chapters 155 and 157. What do you want to do?
Okay.
We'll have some recommendations for you.
Fantastic.
So staff's recommendations is to authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit for review 22 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 155, Rules Relating to Standards of Practice, and Chapter 157, Rules Relating to Practice and Procedure, to the Texas Register for publication and public comment. And I'm available for any additional questions you may have.
Madam Chair, we move that the board approve the staff's recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any further comments, discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. This takes us to agenda item number 15, the report on the Spring Aero Conference. Again, Mr. Bolton and Ms. Robinson were the board participants. If either one of you would like to give us a recap.
Well, I'll tell you this. I think the most valuable time that I spent in this conference was at the board member meeting. And I was just amazed at the differences between the way we do things and other states do things. In some cases, the board members are doing audits, they're doing disciplinary reviews, and they have their hands at everything. They are the staff. Mm-hmm. And so I would just like to say thank you. We don't have to do that. From that meeting, we had significant conversations about tips from GSEs, and the states varied differently. They were varied in how they approached that, and some were I guess because of the lack of information that comes along with that, and more dismissive of them, whereas some states, there was one of the board members from Florida was adamant that they investigate everything to the fullest degree, no matter what. And so again, the diversity of thought on that I think is really interesting. We talked a lot about Perea, and I kind of got, and Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of a disappointment in how that is evolving.
A little bit of a disappointment.
Yeah.
Disappointment in the participation?
I think it's participation. I think it's, the Appraisal Institute is the only provider.
Yeah.
And I think because there has been, we talked about McKissick, and at least the view is that they did not participate or stop their efforts because it wasn't profitable. Mm-hmm. And so it's just not catching on the way I'm sure after a decade of trying to put it together, they hoped it would.
I think that's a great assessment, Chance, from the conference. So, the assumption from McKissick, because we really don't know why they pulled out, but they did pull out, so we only have one provider there. So backing up just a little bit, as we all recall, this was a huge push. I mean, we're talking about campaigning statewide that was done in order to get the boards and the agencies to accept this program. So there's a lot of push, marketing, all of that excitement in the industry. And then I think when it actually launched, we saw that it was not as effective and it was not as successful as we had all hoped and anticipated, specifically because, one, we only have one provider. So it's not like we have a plethora of providers that's offering this to the people that we've promised this great thing to. So from my understanding, the one provider that's out there has a pretty significant wait list where people are not actually able to get serviced right now. That's a problem. And they are, from my understanding, they are working to fix all of these issues. But that's one issue, is that we have a pretty significant wait list. Second issue is that we're finding, based on the conversations I've had with the provider at the conference, this is not officially from them, of course, but I have invited them to contact us to speak to us as a board. But the other thing that we're finding is that people are not getting through the program as quickly as they had anticipated. So it's taking them longer to make it through the program than before. So there's some tweaks and different things there. Tweaks on technology, I think, that needs to be made as well in order to make it more effective for the participants. And then, of course, there's a cost barrier. It is not a cheap service. It is quite expensive.
Weren't people throwing around a number of like $6,000?
$6,000 to $8,000 or something like that, I think. So it is pretty cost prohibitive, particularly for the people that we thought this would benefit, which were the people that needed this type of option, right? I think that it is cost prohibitive. So these are things that, and in the meeting that I brought up, even with AQB Chancellor, that we attended together, these are the things that they're expected, I think, when you have any type of major technological advance, innovative offering, you're going to have issues that you didn't anticipate. But my question to AQB was, or not AQB, I'm sorry. My question to in that meeting was, who is designated as the overseer of these things? So one of the gentlemen said, hey, I've got trainees that can't even get in. So, because I think one of the comments were, well, we're going to monitor the success of this program based on pass rates. That's great. That's a great benchmark, and we absolutely should. But when you have people who can't even get into the program, that's also an issue, right? So who's monitoring those types of things? Right now, no one is monitoring that. So in order for the program itself to be successful, we as an industry have to figure out who's going to be the overseer of start to finish on this program, so that we can identify data points of things we need to address, fix them, and then correct it moving forward. And we, right now as an industry, we don't have that oversight.
I thought that that was the AQB's role, because aren't they?
AQB's role was to
approve the providers.
It was to approve, obviously the curriculum, but approve who can, what the criteria was to become a provider, so to speak, I believe. But no one's monitoring that full cycle of clients on the wait list, clients not being able to be serviced. When they are serviced, it's taking them longer. No one's managing that full cycle of implementation. The measurement piece is going to stand on pass rates. Yeah. And I think anytime you introduce a technology piece like that is what, $2 million, I think, 1.2 or whatever it was, $2 million investment. We need to be monitoring as an industry from start to finish in order to make corrections and do it the right way.
I just think that this is such a complex deal. You have the ASC that has mandated this. Then you have the state agencies that are regulating it to some extent, and then you have service providers who are not they're not required to develop this. They do. Some of them apparently think it's too expensive and it's not profitable.
Absolutely.
So if you don't get anybody to participate, or you have one participant, my understanding is that the Institute has 4 mentors, and if I'm wrong, that was thrown out there.
They hired 2 additional mentors too.
Yeah, that's right.
In order to handle the fact that they couldn't take any more
But that's to handle every Piraeus student currently in the country.
Yeah, can you imagine? So that's an issue too. But again, there's no one monitoring all of those aspects. The only monitoring piece right now is going to be, oh, well, let's see the pass rates. No, we have so many other issues that's starting to pop up that no one in the industry is looking at.
Well, and think about it. In Piraeus, we're saying, okay, that's fine for your experience or part of your experience, but we're not overseeing any of that.
Right.
We don't know who's in the program. Right. We don't know what their progress is. We don't know anything until they say, hey, I've got my piece of paper and I'm ready to take a test.
Yeah, I have invited them to contact us. I believe, Melissa, they'll be reaching out to you, the provider, for one of our upcoming board members, because what I'm most concerned with is that we do have quite a few in Texas that's participating, and I'd like to see how they're doing. And so I've discussed with the provider that perhaps they can bring someone from Texas to speak to the board. I would love to hear firsthand experience on the whole process that our trainee is going through. But in the end, I think it is still a very promising program. So I'm not going to bash it because that's not really what I want to do. I think it's still going to be promising. I think with any major launch like this, however, it does require oversight. It requires data points being collected if there's any chance of us improving it. And that's the piece that's missing. No one's monitoring it enough so that we can say, hey, on the next version, let's improve this. So long term, I think it's going to be great, but it has to have some type of oversight, more so than what we see right now.
As a question on that, you may, or I may already know the answer, but the points of measurement you're talking about, the pass rate and whatnot, but you said there's a waiting list. Can they tell you how many people are waiting?
That's the problem. There's no oversight in terms of even seeing the fact that they have a waiting list. We found this out during Aero, that they have a significant waiting list. And the reason why it came up is because one of the mentors mentioned it in one of our meetings and said, hey, I've got trainees that can't even get in because they're sitting on waiting lists. And then that raised the flag like, oh, wow, we have waiting lists? I mean, so this is how this is evolving in the industry. Again, not to bash the provider. I think it was very courageous for them to launch this and launch it on their own. So this is a huge step for them. So I am not bashing them by any means. I just would love to see it get better.
I don't understand. I have a question. I don't understand. When it's technology, how do you have a waiting list?
The waiting list, from my understanding from the conference, is due to the lack of staff. So mentors, for example, everyone that enters this technology-based program, they have to have a mentor to walk them through. And so if we only have 4 mentors, I believe right now on average, if I remember correctly from my conversation with the provider, it's like 30 people to 1 mentor right now, which is insane, right? And so they're going from spending, where they were anticipated to spend a couple hours with these people to now spending tons of time, and that's not even enough. And so that's why they've hired additional mentors. But that's the bottleneck, is that they didn't have the staff to, from my understanding, didn't have the staff to handle the people coming in.
Okay.
So they're trying to work out the kinks. Again, I'm not bashing that provider. I think it's courageous that they're doing it, as no one else did it. So they're very courageous for that. I just think as an industry, we're going to have to watch that very closely and do what we can to make it better.
Yeah, I think that when at some point we thought there was 6 to 8 potential providers, and I don't know if that still happens. I think from what we are in charge of, the thing is how many people are going to end up, if we see a decline in trainee numbers, that impacts our budget. If all of a sudden we see all these people that we didn't know anything about because they were in this program, so right now we know who are trainees, but in the Appraiser program we won't know who's trainees, who's going to eventually be licensed. All of a sudden they come in again, that affects our budget. And so I would like to have that information and know that. But if there is a single provider, now I feel like we start to get into proprietary information, right? The Appraisal Institute doesn't necessarily want everyone to know how many students they have in this program. Understandably, they're a private enterprise. And so how do we ask for that information without violating their business secrets? But it's part of our budgeting, so we need to know that information. So I like that, striking that balance when there is only one provider currently. It's kind of important information for us.
You make an excellent point on that, and that's actually something. Can we contact that provider, which they'll be reaching out to us anyway?
I can't believe Scott's not.
I know, the one meeting he's not here.
Can we request, at least for the state of Texas participants, you don't have to give us, you can scrub the data, you don't have to give us necessarily names, but perhaps we can get a monthly report or quarterly report to see how the
and maybe they are comfortable sharing that information, which is great. But my worry is that if we ask for it, then does it become FOIA request available, and they might not want to share that. So I just want to be cognizant of that. Again, they might not have no issue sharing that with us. They're a huge enterprise and have all kinds of continuing education and other programs, so it might not be a big deal for them. But I want to try and explore that, but also understand that there might be limitations with information that they're willing to share.
That's a great
So-
point. I think we should at least explore it, and you're absolutely right. That affects our budgeting numbers, so that is information we need to know as we project.
Well, as, you know, when we get to the budget and we see this excess funds that we have, you know, we were sort of anticipating, okay, how many people are, we can't start doing anything with that because we just don't know how PRAE is going to affect our numbers and our resulting revenue. So it's kind of put us in this waiting cycle, but as we build up this excess fund, we can't just do nothing about it, so.
Well, the other part of this, though, too, and this is just an observation, I mean, there is a dichotomy here of sorts. That is that a supervisory appraiser can only have up to 5 trainees, and now we have mentors that have 30. Now, you call them mentors, and that may change the whole spectrum of that, but still, they're in charge of guiding and counseling these trainees in developing.
But the whole point of PRAE is that it's technology-based, because we couldn't find supervisors. So 1 to 5, but if you're learning virtually is 1 to 30 fine. And if the AQB has approved that, then they feel like that's fine. So, you know, I mean, we don't have any say-so over that.
And I would have to look at that because I don't know that the AQB really looked at the mentor ratio. I think they put, and I may be wrong, and of course we can look this up, but I believe their restrictions were based on product and technology requirements. I don't know if they looked at the ratio of mentor to
I think the mentor component was a requirement, but.
Well, they had to have mentors, but I don't know if they capped them. I don't know. That I don't know.
Yeah.
And that would be something good to look into. So it's a lot there. Again, I applaud them from coming out, being the only ones, but I'd love to see this be a success like we all thought.
Absolutely.
It should have been.
Yeah. I mean, it's reasonable that there would be growing pains, right?
Absolutely.
It took them 10 years to implement this.
Absolutely. It's a big overtaking.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else from Arrow that you wanted to share?
Nope.
Ms. Robinson, anything else?
The breakfast was great. We were at Embassy Suites, so you know how that goes. I'm kidding. Well, no, it was really good. Let me think. Chance, you really covered a lot of the high points. I think it's still a very good investment for us to continue to participate in, especially the new board members as new board members come on. I think it's essential to at least attend 1 or 2, just to get a good feel for how other states are doing things. But no, I think Chance, you pretty much covered the highlights of.
In the board members meeting, about how many states would you say were there represented? I feel like Mississippi is always there, and.
Mississippi was there, Florida. The moderator was from Alabama.
Okay.
Which I'm trying to start a dialogue with him as well, because I just get different perspectives on something.
Oh, yeah, I learned so much there.
I mean, I would say that at least half the states.
Yeah, it was pretty diverse. Yeah, we had a very good crowd on our board meeting.
I mean, there are people from Wyoming, Alaska was there.
Oh, yeah, it sure was.
Oh, okay, that seems like bigger participation than
I didn't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry, but I was just thinking, but the thing that I think was so cool is that Texas always shines, Melissa.
Always.
Always. I am telling you, it's like folks looks at Texas like, okay, how do we handle the diversity and the complaints and I'm telling you, it's really cool to be in a room and see that people really respect the state of Texas and the work we're doing. So thanks to the staff for that and all the hard work. That's super awesome.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that was a good takeaway.
Yeah, my first Arrow was in the fall of 2019. I had been appointed 3 weeks before, maybe. and I remember how shocked I was in that board member meeting. I said, oh, our board doesn't ever look at anything enforcement related. And they were like, what do you do? I don't know, but we're very busy and we have very long board meetings. And it seems like we're doing a lot, but I don't know. So yes, always a learning opportunity. And we certainly appreciate you all willing to travel to Nashville to.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I have to say this, it's come up now about 3 times in this meeting, but yes, thank you, staff, you make us look good.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 16, discussion and possible action regarding the 2025 budget and budget policy and investment policy. This was sent under separate cover. Ms. Williams.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Board. Agenda item 16, discussion and possible action regarding the TALCB FY25 budget, the budget and financial administration policy and investment policies. As the chair mentioned, the materials were sent under separate cover and not included in the public meeting materials. The committee did meet with staff back in April to review the progress of the first draft of the budget. And the policies, the budget and financial administration policies and the investment policy. Highlights of the budget include our revenue projections are being based on a weighted 3-year average with more weight being applied to, if it's an even year, we look at an even year to kind of get an even comparison. If it's an odd year, so like 25, we put more weight on FY23 to kind of have that as indicative of the revenue that we're projecting in the future. We are including a 3% merit. It's included in the salary and wages line items. No additional FTEs or full-time staff are being added during this budget cycle. You will see that there's a decrease in our equipment rental because we've determined that we could not renew some leases on some copiers. We're no longer needed. Staff is working remotely, so that's an expense we can cut. And then the last thing is the statewide cost allocation plan. That amount that you're going to see in the budget, it varies from year to year. It's an amount that is determined by the Office of the Governor, and all agencies are required to pay its allocated share. And so the amount that you see in the budget is based on the amount that we paid for FY23. At the time that the budget was completed back in April, the information hadn't been received. It was actually just released on May 7th. And so as we do the second draft of the budget, we'll update those numbers and we'll go from there. As the chair mentioned briefly, we do have a sizable amount in our fund balance. And we're going to continue to monitor that and then work through recommendations to ensure that we don't continue to grow too fast and to a substantial amount. We want to maintain an amount that is sufficient, however, to allow us to respond to shifts in the industry. So we'll continue to work to refine this and provide recommendations to the Budget Committee. The Budget and Financial Administration Policy, it has been updated. It was updated to correct some grammatical errors, to update the language regarding our salary guides and our salary practices. It removed references to the Educational Development Reserve that we no longer have. And the investment policy also included some of those same adjustments, grammatical errors, and removed reference to the Educational Development Reserve. Staff?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
With regard to so I noticed on section 1.04, second paragraph, you change it to cover 6 to 3 months.
Yes, sir.
And then on the operations and contingency reserve section, 107B, it talks about 3 months of operational operating expenses. So those seem to be, the 6 and the 3 seem to be at odds, and that may be one of those errors, but which one is the right number?
The right one is the 6 months, and I'm sorry, I thought you guys were sent the copy that had the track changes in it, and so on my version that I'm looking at, that 3 months is struck through.
Yeah, ours is the opposite. The 6 is struck through and the 3 is.
Okay, yeah. On mine, it says not less than 3 months is struck through, and then there's the underline under the 6 months. So the 6 months is what we're proposing, and we're going to change from in the 3 months. And just to be clear, it's not that we have 3 months of reserve. It says that we should maintain not less than 3 months, and we currently reserve 35%, so roughly 3.5 months of reserve,
Okay,
and not necessarily 3 months.
So with that larger reserve, plus we have, what, roughly $3 million in excess funds, what's the number that we need?
And that is something that we're having to refine and to look at closely. I'm going to be working with Melissa and Chelsea and Kat to go through that and then provide some recommendations to the Budget Committee to work through those numbers.
So when we talked about this at the Budget Committee, you all mentioned that Trek was moving from 6 to 3.
Yes.
So what is, in my mind, I'm sort of thinking we want to be prudent but not be, excessive. So what is a situation in which we would need to tap into these? I'm thinking, like during the hurricane, I think everybody that was in affected counties, we said we'll just hold your license over for a few months. So we didn't not receive that revenue, but we didn't receive it for however many months. So I can sort of see like a natural disaster situation. Did we ever, during COVID, give any, I'm just trying to think, okay, all of our license holders are on 2-year cycles. So if there's a natural disaster that would affect, for that year, roughly half of our license holders in a certain area would affect however many, I'm just trying to what would be all the possibilities so that we can be reasonable with this figure?
I'll start and then Renata. Okay. I would say it's our first line of emergency. Mm-hmm. The hope is that we wouldn't use it. In fact, the way I think about it in my head is we certainly are not going to tap into that reserve. But it's if something significantly unexpected happens, or if our license holders drop off so great that our runway goes away. But similar to our own savings account, right? Like you have kind of the retirement accounts, but then also if you lose your job kind of thing. Right. So it kind of the professional version of that. But so hopefully nothing. Mm-hmm. I mean, hopefully we would never use it. But I think, which is why I think we're trying to toggle kind of get the amount right. And we've toggled it back and forth between the board and the commission over the last couple of years, trying to kind of get it right under the circumstances.
So the proposal is to change the language to no less than 6 months. So this figure, that 800,000 figure, is going to substantially increase if we change that policy.
It will increase.
And I just want to say from the board, for the committee level, we are working through this language. We are working through the changes. So what you see is not final by any means. We have asked that the staff comes back into the next committee meeting with more recommendations for changes that's going to be more reflective of where we are today, because some of the things you guys see in the policies are things that's been there forever, right? Or that's been there quite a while. And so what you see is not in stone by any means. It's something that as a committee we are starting to realize that we need to make changes. And so that is our next committee meeting, is that the staff will be coming back with more recommendations on how to fine tune this better to where it reflects where we truly are today.
Okay, and of course so then it would be like your July budget meeting would be when we go over the changes, but then in August we have to adopt it in order for us to, September starts our budget cycle.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Stephanie, I have a question about your committee.
Yes.
In the financial policy, it says the board must minimize excess fund balances when year-end fund balances exceed a total of operation and contingency reserve by more than 20%. We clearly are above that.
Yes.
And then it says the staff must offer recommendations for sustainable fee reductions. Is that something that y'all are considering?
So that is something that came up at our last committee meeting. So, and that is an area that we are discussing on the committee level, and we are changing on the committee level. What we realized is that we have certain terminology in those policies that we just missed. And it was a ball dropped. I would say by myself as the chair of that committee, I should have caught it. But those were things that we have approved time over time when we were asked to make updates or to look at the policy for feedback and to make changes. And that's just something I didn't catch.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, are you actively considering fee reductions?
Well, we just increased the fees, right? And we've made the promise that we wouldn't affect that for a while. But what I have asked the staff to do is to take a look at our cushion money, which is quite a bit right now, and come back to the next meeting with recommendations on how we can make sure there's enough to cover us from a contingency standpoint, while at the same time utilizing that access money for things that are going to make us more innovative, more better as an agency. We need ideas on how to spend that down. What I want to remind the board of is that when that policy was written, it was written during a time of sunset. So when our agency faced that sunset time, what they were looking at is we had all this money sitting in the bank. However, we had customer service issues. We had, people waiting on the lines for 12, 15 minutes. So that was something that Sunset identified, that why do you have so much money just sitting there when you have all these agency problems you need to fix? And so that's how that came about, is no more sitting on all this money. Start flushing it into the agency and improving the agency. Now we're at a state that the agency has improved greatly. I think under the new the staff and the shifts that we have with our staff, the operational, the efficiencies that has been put in place, the new board directions, we have really, in the leadership, of course, in our team, we have really improved where we were 6 years ago when we were under Sunset Review. And so that's why the language is critical now that we've caught it. And again, I take responsibility for that as the chair. I should have caught it before now, but now it's time to start re-looking at that language. But that's where the original language came from, is through Sunset.
Sure, but I mean, the base, at the base level, if we have more money, we're taking more money than we need to operate this agency, which is the case, then that money should go back to the license holders.
I do not disagree. It's interesting to hear these comments. Kind of, we listened to our license holder count and kind of talking about kind of a time of uncertainty that might be ahead in terms of what those how many license holders we will have. And so this will be discussed at the committee level to bring some recommendations to you. I fear that if we are reactionary, seeing that amount and say, well, we have too much money, let's give it back, then in another 6 months to 1 year, we may be in a really different place. And so my hope is that that is going on in the back of our mind, that we cannot just collect money and keep taking it from license holders. But at the same time, I don't want to raise fees, lower fees, raise fees, lower fees. I want us to have a longer runway than that to account for a market that has some uncertainty and that will ebb and flow. And then I think we're going into a time where that will likely, it seems to be, I don't know the future hold, but it seems like we're going into something down. So I want to just hold that into, like, kind of keep that close.
I understand that. And I'm not saying that, there's $3.1 million, send it all back. No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that, one, I don't want to have any optics of prior administrations. And for one, and I do think that if it's in fairness, we did raise those fees, and if that resulted in an excess of cash, then I think we have a duty to our license holders to refund some.
What do you think is bad with the optics of raising and lowering fees? If we say, as you noticed, we raised your fees and we didn't, because we thought that we wanted to make the agency better, and turns out we could make the agency better without all that, or we had more license holders. There was a lot of things that contributed to it, but what's wrong with the optics of saying, hey, we took this money from you and now we're going to give you 2 cycles of a lower fee? Do you think that looks odd from a consumer standpoint? If your agency all of a sudden, if your bar fee goes down and they said, well, we had excess, would that make you feel uncomfortable about their?
Not necessarily. Are there any other limitations on us from a legal perspective of how much our bandwidth to raise and lower fees? Like I know from
it's just in our rules.
Yeah. We could change that at will, basically.
I'm currently seeking a fee raise on the commission side, and I'm receiving significant challenges at the executive state leadership level for just being committed to keeping license fees low, which we're a state that wants to do that. So I think lowering fees is very easy. Raising fees is significantly harder. I don't think there's any optics wrong with giving money back to people. I worry about then what happens next. I think we should be perfect before we do that. I think we need to serve people very well. I also think we want to look far down the line to make sure that that is done thoughtfully with a downturn in mind. You know, what are AMCs looking like? What do we expect our license holder count to be? We know we have committed to no additional fee increases for a significant period of time. Can we commit to that? I just think there's a whole lot more to talk about before I know you're not saying 3.1 goes back, but should there be an amount that goes back?
Okay, well, if you're forecasting that we're going to see a downturn, what does it look like? Or what are we forecasting?
That's what we're looking at now is we are starting to see a the market is starting to cool down. And so we're not having as much revenue come in certain areas. And so that's what we're looking at is we're not going to keep that number. First of all, we will not keep that large of a cushion because we simply don't need it. And that was just an oversight on my end as a chair that I should have caught. But again, it is a deeper conversation as opposed to just giving the money back because we did commit to not raising the fees. And if we made that commitment, we want to make sure in the next 5-10 years, really 10 years would be great, that we don't raise those fees as we committed. And in order to be safe in making that statement, we do have to make sure that there's money available to not raise those fees. And for the committee, let's put that on the list for the staff and for the committee to discuss what could be some options of giving some of that money back to the license holders if we have the bandwidth to do that. That is definitely not something I'm opposing at all. And I think that's but that's gonna require a deeper conversation because it's not just about giving the money back to the license holders. It's about all the other, it's an ecosystem when you do that budget. And there's tons of things that are tied to that, not just the license revenue, right? And so we want to make sure we're looking at that full ecosystem before we make a decision to give that money back to the license holders, because what happens if some of the other stuff that we use to budget falls? So we need to look at it in totality, but let's put that on the list of possible recommendations from the staff to what does that look like if we were to give some type of stipend back or some type of I don't know. We need to look a little bit deeper at that.
The policy says that the staff must offer recommendations for sustainable fee reductions.
That policy is changing.
Well, I would say that I would disagree with changing that because I think that is prudent for us if we are amassing cash. And again, I'm not saying that we give it all back, but we at least need to have understanding, complying with this policy, options to deal with that.
So kind of along that lines, the budget, several things come to us under separate covers. The budget, the strat plan, the budget policy, and the investment policy.
Yes, ma'am.
The budget and strat plan eventually become, I understand they're all public documents. They're all for it. You can do an information request on any of them, but we don't ever publish the budget policy or the investment policy. We publish it somewhere on.
Like it's published when it's final, when it's in a draft and it's a working document.
Where does it get published?
It would be in our.
It should be in our
staff reports.
In our materials,
like, so after this meeting, these documents will then, if we go to today's meeting.
I mean, these things, because they're draft, they wouldn't be because they're draft.
But when they're
Once they're finalized,
adopted,
they're in our materials. They should be in our website, like staff reports, or there's a way to get to them.
Well, okay. Why aren't the drafts public?
Because it's a working document. This is like a government sort of protection that we have to keep sort of the work in progress public.
Is it not a transparency issue there? Is that this is what we're thinking?
No, I mean, I think the reason why it's that way is being protective of that sausage making process is keeping that part private, and you have freer conversations that way. But the finalized document is made public. That's what's going to be effective on everybody.
I could sort of see also that it would be confusing for people who aren't really aware of the process if there are different iterations of the budget, and then you go, why do the, if you don't understand, yeah.
I agree with our executive director that raising and lowering fees, the optics are really poor because in one year they're expected to pay so much money and then they get a rebate. Well, before they're going to pay the next year, they're going to ask, hey, am I going to be getting any rebate? It just makes things much more complicated. I think with extra money, however, there could be an opportunity to maybe set up scholarships that if we have the extra money in a year, we can use it for that purpose. And you make the announcement that due to the economy and so on and so forth, we are in a position to give scholarship. I know that it's complicated and all of that, but it's a better appearance than raising, lowering, rebating, refunding. I think it makes us look volatile instead of stable.
I would say that as an appraiser who pays those fees, I would rather pay less, and I'd love to get a rebate.
But
Well, of course,
but
of
the
course.
thing is, everybody's affected by the education, though. Everybody, all the appraisers, the trainees, the license holders, all of them. So I understand, like, it's difficult going up and down with the fees, with applications and stuff, but everybody being, having some sort of I guess, scholarship available and stuff for something that is affected, they still have to pay for education. So maybe a little something here for them if we give them that opportunity.
I'm not sure I quite understand the scholarship. Is this?
I'm just saying as just a contributing towards our continuing education or even qualifying education instead of a all-around just fee reduction, as in for having this having money put aside for people that may want to that may want to have some reduction in their or our contribution, I guess, towards the education fees.
I think that might look like this is our slush fund for pet projects, and I think that would be a very, very bad look.
I don't think it would appear to be a slush fund. It would appear to be a handout to those that, okay, it took everything they had to pay their fees, but now they have to pay for some continuing education, and that will cost them. This is kind of a reward because we have budgeted responsibly, but we can't base dues on a year where inflation might hit. We might have some major equipment repairs, damage, whatever. There's always a chance that the building could get hit by a tornado, and you need that extra money to announce, oh, we're giving everybody a refund this year of $50. I would personally ask, well, why'd you take it in the first place?
That was the point I was getting ready to ask.
But just because we're embarrassed that we took it doesn't mean that we shouldn't give it back.
My question now, though, is, did we need that fee increase?
That's what we're looking at on the committee level, is for them to pull together, why did we make the decision? Because the decision was made prior to our committee. So we're looking at now the historical data on why did we make that change to begin with.
I don't fault anyone for making that decision. When you go back and look at the meeting materials, that was in September 2019, and I think that the thinking was sound and it made sense. We were in a terrible position and we needed money in order to fix some things. And so I think we weren't wrong in making that fee increase, but it turns out we had a huge influx of people coming into the agency and in license holders, and we didn't need, and we've gotten enforcement under control, so we didn't need as many people as we thought we were going to. So I think to me, we say to the license holders, we asked you for more money to get this agency under control, and we did, and now it is, and now we have an excess. Shouldn't we say for the next cycle it's going to be $200 lower or whatever? I mean, I don't think it has to be a long-term thing. And honestly, if we are being honest, the vast majority of appraisers, I haven't heard one thing from anyone about what the fees are. They really don't. They go, it's several, you might complain while you're pressing, enter in your own mind, but we don't even hear about it because it's not something that everyone, you work so hard to get this license, you're going to pay whatever it is. And whether it's, you don't even remember. Really, you won't say, "Oh, was it higher?" You just don't even think that. Does anybody else, appraisers? I
agree with that. Just from a from a legal perspective, I don't really track from year to year what I'm paying for bar fees. Maybe I should, maybe that but I'm not thinking about it that way. You
need it.
It's not a decision.
What are your bar fees every year?
I don't know. I gotta look. I got a letter sitting on my desk that's telling me I gotta pay them, and
you just pay it, right?
Yeah.
Which I understand because you also do the accounting for TREC, and that for people who are part-time realtors, that is a decision point for them. For appraisers, it's not this is how you make money, and this is you are not going to let it go. It was years to get to there, so you won't let it go no matter how much the fee is. So I just don't think that appraisers pay attention enough to say, wow, why is it lower than it was last time? Or even, wow, why is it higher?
This is a really good discussion.
This, if I may.
Yes, please.
Everyone has real good points here. I think everyone has validity in what they have. However, I tend to look at us and I look at, well, we're self-funded. Okay, that's important. So we got to look at this a little bit longer in the long view. What's this industry going to look like? I know that we do bienniums. We have 3 years of the budget that we're working on right now. But even in my practice, I look at 5 years, 7 years. And I will promise you, the way that we are increasing our efficiencies through technology, it won't be the same. It will not be the same as what we are right now and what the constant is for us. We'll be able to do more with less. That means even less people. That means less licensed and certified people. Artificial intelligence is out there, and businesses are pouring billions of dollars into that to make it work and work properly. And it will be a matter of time it will come to our door as well.
So, but shouldn't those contingencies be considered in our operating reserve? So what I'm hearing is not only was our operating reserve somewhere between 3 and 4 months, but now we need 6 months. And then on top of that, we still want to have more money for, to me, it should all be in one bucket.
I don't disagree. I'm kind of like Stephanie, maybe I slept through this. I was asleep at the switch. I think this is a good opportunity for the
I was awake.
finance.
I just missed that piece.
But I think as a committee member on the finance committee, we've heard some good dialogue here that we can take back and
this is really
make some
great
sound
conversation.
things.
I agree.
Yes.
It's great suggestions and great dialogue. And I would even ask Kat, is it appropriate? And let's continue. By the way, I don't mean to stop this, but is it appropriate for the board members to be able to submit to you some of these specific requests to consider for our committee meetings? Is that something that's okay? That doesn't violate any type of rules?
No.
I love this dialogue. And again, as the chair and also as a representative of the public and not appraiser, I see things a little different, but I love hearing the feedback from the appraisers because these are things that I may not see or recognize or even think that's important, but we need to acknowledge them. So, for our committee meetings, let's please relook at this video and relook at what's being said, and let's put all those things on the table. And then, of course, send comments to Kat so we can make sure we include those things in our committee meetings. But great suggestions, I think, from everyone.
Yeah. The process is working.
The process is working. That's why we have an amazing board.
Making the sausage.
The one thing I would say here, and the board has absolutely the right to change our policies, but as it stands today, the board must minimize excess fund balances. When year-end fund balances exceed the total of operations and contingency reserve by more than 20%, staff must offer recommendations for sustainable fee reductions, and I would just ask that we comply with that policy.
Absolutely, and those recommendations will be made at our next committee meeting.
Very good.
That is what we've requested of the
So, and I think that if we decide that 6 months isn't enough, that with all these, people saying things could happen, if it needs to be more than that, but that, to me, the operating reserve should be it. That's it. It's not the operating reserve plus extra for in case, AI takes over appraising. I mean, like, that should be it, if, in my opinion.
I think that's a very good.
I do want to, you know, obviously consider best practices for other agencies as well.
In light of looking far ahead and the anticipation, it appears that our industry is going to be shrinking, but I mean, we have to consider that the agency will as well.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would reduce, I mean, in my mind, that reduces budgets too, so.
Yeah, we have a budget that is driven by staff, and we have a staff of, are we 12 or 13? 13. So to the extent that our license holders go down, so would our staff. And if, to the extent that our staff are listening to this, we're not talking about any sort of reduction in force right now.
Not getting any rid of anybody.
But over the course of time, if we significantly shrink, so would our operations, essentially, right? Now, that can only happen so much, right? You still need to enforce. You still need to educate. You still need to license.
Sure. Well, and to that, what does RAMP do to staffing?
I don't know. I think we will find efficiencies through RAMP. Yep. We have found so many in fact, I think this is part of our problem. The efficiencies we've discovered on board staff are so significant that we are operating very lean and quickly. Like, we are a very well-oiled machine.
No question.
If you look back to a couple of years ago, things look really different. So I think part of our excess funding comes from the efficiencies we found, not using the contract. We had a whole budget for contract reviewers. We don't do that now. We have received grant funds that, you know, a couple years ago weren't available. There are some variables that have gone in our favor that may or may not continue, right? But this has been a very instructive conversation. We will bring these things back to you. And we will also do a little bit of digging on other SDSI agencies and what they look like. The one reserve makes me a little bit nervous. It makes me want to grow that to maybe a year, maybe longer, if that's our only fallback.
Well, yeah, and I'd like to know how long has that policy been in place about the reserve plus 20%?
I think that came at sunset in direct response to the situation that we were in then, which is that we had excess funds and poor customer service.
But back then we had $1.2 million in excess funds in the building fund, and now we're at $3 million.
Correct. I actually think that the reason you have that is because the commission had that, and that was much more significant on the commission side.
Oh yeah, it was like 12 million
Right.
on the commission side.
What I think is this is a great problem. What we are seeing is that in the past several years, this agency has done an excellent job on correcting the issues we had, the efficiencies we put in place. So having that money, it's a good thing that we're at that point. Now it's time to talk about how do we, responsibly spend it, invest it, those types of things. But the fact that we are even holding that kind of money compared to where we were 6 years ago, I think that's amazing. And looking at our efficiencies and customer service rates and client complaint processing and all of those things, that's a good problem to have. That shows that we did our job, that we are now at a point to where the agency is running very well. And we do have this extra money. Again, now it's time to talk about how to reallocate it.
So
but we're at that point.
This is probably a silly question, but our outside auditors, when they audit our budget, clearly aren't auditing our budget policies compared to our budget, and that's also problematic. So that is something that needs to be corrected as well. If that, look at our budget policies and investment policies and make sure we're doing what we say we're doing.
I agree with that, and I have, in the last committee meeting, have asked the staff to comb through all of those policies with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that we are not not in compliance with what we've stated that we should do in our policies. And then, so that this type of thing doesn't happen, because it shouldn't have happened. And it happened on my watch. So I take responsibility for that. It should not have happened. It was an oversight. But last committee meeting, that was the request to the staff, is that we comb through these policies with a fine-tooth comb to make sure there are no other policies that we are not in compliance with.
And let's make sure also that they are available to the public. I sort of was trying to track back to when these originated, and I could find, in 2019, it was 30 to 40% as opposed to 3 months, and I think that's where we've stayed. The policy changed, but the formula didn't. And the 20% was there at that time, so I couldn't find past policies anywhere available on either the TREC or the TALC website. So let's make sure that those are available publicly.
And if the committee,
especially if they're driving our decision.
If we can make note of that as a committee, that we make sure that those are publicly available and very easily accessible, where it's prominent on the website for that.
I know, Ms. Williams, that they audit, one of the topics of an audit is the Public Funds Investment Act. Is that the same thing as our investment policy, or those are two different things?
No, ma'am, that's completely different.
But great feedback, guys. I really appreciate that, and that's definitely going to help guide us as a committee on where we need to go next. So thank you for that.
I have one question here. In the financial policies 107B, the last sentence says staff must provide a 3-year expenditure plan for large projects to better estimate total project expenses or expense. Do we have that? Can I see that?
We don't have any large projects on the board side at this time, so that's why it has not been.
Okay.
Right, because RAMP would fall under that, but TREC
is covering the cost.
covering that.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I just had one thing in summary to say, and it reflects my thoughts that Chance was talking about, going, maybe giving a rebate or 1 year or something, lowering the fees. I think we all have to continue to remember that appraisers in general are paid on commissions. That's one thing, so, they can understand, having a rebate or whatever. The other thing is that our business goes up and down. A lot of businesses don't, and they trend, but appraisers often see bad times, they see great times. And when you can help their bottom line, I think it's not that they're not indifferent to that or suspicious.
Well, and I think we have an opportunity to reduce a barrier to entry, which are high fees, which, and I don't know if anybody knows, but I think our fees are some of the highest in the country, aren't they? And maybe that's something we look at.
In comparison, I think we are on the higher tier.
Yeah, and so if we can, as the governor's initiative to remove those barriers to entry is to make it a little less painful, then I'm all for that.
I think that's a great suggestion, and let's please put that on the committee list to discuss how we can do that. If the staff can come with recommendations on how we can help our license holders. And as Lisa made a comment or mentioned, also reducing the barriers in terms of helping to cover their continuous education. Because when you, as a business owner, owning a business for 20 years myself, at the end of the year, reduction in costs is reduction in costs, regardless of which pocket you come out of. So if we're able to provide supplemental assistance or scholarships to help them with their continuing education, that still is going to increase your profit margins at the end of the year. I'm not saying that's what we do. I'm just saying that we can be creative in how we help appraisers reduce annual costs.
I guess from my standpoint, I appreciate that, and that is a way to reduce barriers. But you're picking and choosing who gets to get essentially a rebate. Instead of doing it across the board in some fashion. And I'm not saying that everybody gets a certain amount or whatever. We'll figure out how much money we could give back, and general certified appraisers who pay more in fees may get a little bit more, whatever it may be. But it just seems like the scholarship, while I appreciate the sentiment of it, is just picking winners and losers,
Well, you can also there's lots of options, but another one that I was thinking of is we're having trouble getting supervisors. So we give an honorarium for however, many they can take. If they can take 5, we give them 5 honorariums. There's ways that I think, and I still believe, that the optics of going up and down on fees makes us look like we're not stable and that we don't have a handle on our budget. I would much rather have the fees remain the same, even though there's inflation, there's all these other things, and find another way to reward the profession. My personal opinion.
I don't disagree with that, but we've got about, what, an 18-month operating reserve, right? So even if we wanted to go to 12 months operating reserve, which I think is pretty good, couldn't we kind of have both too? Reduce fees and then hold a little bit back if we think that, we may need to have a little bit extra, rather than increasing fees the following year, hold a little bit back just in case? It wouldn't be a massive reduction, but couldn't we kind of consider doing both at the same time?
I think that is something we could definitely put on the table for consideration. Absolutely.
Yeah, again, it's what the policy says we have to do.
Well, the policy is changing. We are in policy change
I
phase.
disagree with that. I think that's very prudent, and given the history and what has happened previously, the agency needs to divest of excess funds. And I think the right way to do that is to give it back to the people who paid it in the first place.
That's a very good point.
Very good. So I think this robust discussion is extraordinarily helpful for both staff and the committee to make necessary changes so that in August we are ready to approve the budget and the budget policy.
Yeah, and this was really good and very helpful, again, from me being on the public side of things. It's very good to hear directly from the appraiser. So I really do appreciate it. And please, if our team can make sure we are documenting what is being requested of us as a committee, I think that's just going to make us even stronger. So really, thank you for that.
Well, and I appreciate your perspective as well. Don't get me wrong. Just because we may see it a little
I know
bit
you really don't. That's okay.
I'm
just kidding. I'm kidding.
It's good to have that exchange.
No, it is. It really is, because I did not look at it from that angle for the appraisers. I really didn't. I'm looking at it from a business, operations, contingency funds, those types of things, because that's my background as an owner, right? But I didn't look at it from from your angle as an appraiser. So or from any of the appraisers. So that's actually really eye-opening for me. So I really do appreciate the feedback. It's just going to make us better as a committee to be able to bring you guys something better to chew on and to contemplate on what's going to be approved and what's not. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really have to say how much I appreciate everyone, looking at these things, and that is our job, right? We are an oversight board, and to look at them and not just say, oh, there it is in the materials, let's everybody just vote for it and have no discussion, and not look at it critically. We're not doing our job. So I appreciate everybody's participation in that conversation. There was no action for us on that item, as it's up next time. So we will move to agenda item number 17, discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 25 to 29 strat plan. Mr. Slagle, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and board members. Tony Slagle, Deputy Executive Director. Before you on this item is the draft fiscal year 2025-2029 agency strategic plan. This document was provided to you separately in an email. I believe it's on a separate tab on your Surface as well. So I will refer to a couple of page numbers. I just wanted to make sure you had the proper document open. The strategic, just to summarize, for those of you who have not been involved in this process prior, the strategic plan is required to be produced by state agencies every even-numbered year prior to the upcoming legislative session. The plan is required to be organized in a specific way, and that includes templates that we're required to use and follow. Before I go on, I just want to thank everybody on staff who helped with this. This was a group effort. The division directors, the general counsels, and specifically Summer Mandel, who worked very hard to make this document as clear and concise as possible. So I want to thank everybody. Also, just so for those of you who have not been involved in this prior, For most agencies, this document is part of the appropriations process and the budgeting for those agencies. Because we're an SDSI agency, we're not part of that budget, but that statewide budgetary and appropriations process. However, we're still required to submit this plan to statewide leadership, and this year it's due on June 1st. I think it's due every time it's on June 1st. The document before you applies to both the board and the commission, and while there are parts that are specific to the board, the majority of it, or a good deal of it, applies to both. I did want to point out a couple of things for your consideration. Throughout the plan, the forthcoming transition to a new database is used to speak to future process efficiencies and ways in which the agency can further improve service to the agency stakeholders. As in the past, the agency uses the redundancy and impediments section of the plan, which is located on pages 18 through 20, to address possible legislative changes. I did want to point out 2 items under this section that relate to the board. The first is a board-specific item and relates to the admin penalties imposed on AMCs by the board, and the second applies to both the board and the commission, and is the statute that makes certain license holder contact information confidential that was passed last session. I'm happy to go into more detail on both of those, but if not, I'm happy to continue with the summary of this. Just wanted to pause and see if anybody had any questions about this.
Wait, to clarify that, it's a legislative priority for next session? Is that what you're saying?
Well, so we use the redundancies and impediments section of the plan to talk about legislative priorities. That's just recommendations, nothing set in stone. Obviously, if either the board or the commission moves forward on these things, there would be a process in place by which draft legislation would be before you and you discuss it. But that's a section where we talk about various items that could increase efficiencies or various redundancies to improve upon. And there is one item on there that's not related. It's not related to a legislative change, but it is a redundancy in terms of moving away from paper and becoming more electronic.
So the AMC administrative penalty is because it was going into the education fund, which is no longer a thing, so that needs to be corrected. Is it problematic that it's referencing something that doesn't exist any longer?
Well, I don't know if you want to speak to this, Kat, but...
No, it's not. And just to be clear, this was a change that was made on the appraiser side due to sunset, but it wasn't made on the AMC side. And so this is just bringing that into alignment.
Okay. Any questions about the strat plan?
I have a couple more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make sure that if you had, I wanted to pause on that particular item. So the other portion I wanted to point out to you was to bring your attention to some performance measures. The first one is on the bottom of page 39 of the plan. This is really an amended version of a current measure that required the board to calculate the number of jurisdictional complaints received. Because enforcement spends time and resources on all complaints, regardless of whether or not they're jurisdictional, the measure has been amended to report the number of all complaints received, and this also reflects the current practice of the Enforcement Division. And then there are 3 new measures located on pages 43 through 44 of the document that relate to the work of the Communications Department. And those new measures report the open rate of the newsletter, the number of the agency's social media followers, and the agency's social media engagement rate. So those are 3 new measures that have been added. If there are no questions on that, I'm happy to go on with the staff's recommendation for the
If you could just give me 1 sec.
Yes, ma'am.
Looking back at staff reports, from my recollection, we don't have a whole lot of non-jurisdictional, but I think that was put in place for a reason, because essentially non-jurisdictional complaints take very little time to look over and decide that they are non-jurisdictional. So changing that back to include them, I'm kind of unclear on why we would do that, because it's not really a meaningful figure. It doesn't require a lot of resources.
I'll let Melissa speak to that if that's all right.
That's good.
I think the reason that I requested for that to be changed is because I wanted just consistency between our reports, like how we tell the AAC what we're working on, how we report to y'all what we're working on a monthly basis, and what we report to the governor's office. a lot of times the non-jurisdiction complaints don't take a lot of work, like, you know, if it's an appraisal district issue, but sometimes they do. Like, it takes one of our attorneys to look at it and do a jurisdictional analysis to say, like, okay, they're asking, is this like an actual BPO is one that we get a lot, or evaluation? So there is work that goes into it. It just didn't feel right to not consider that as part of our workload, that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. So if there are no changes to the strat plan as drafted, and I don't know if anybody has any or not, but if not, I could go into what the recommended motion is.
So this is we do approve the strat plan today?
Yes, ma'am. So there's sort of a two-part thing. There's a motion to have staff to approve it as drafted with any non-substantive changes. But the second part of it, because this applies to both the commission and the board, there needs to be a mechanism like a delegation in case the commission changes anything that does impact both, so that there can be a follow-up and an approval of the final plan after the commission's meeting after all of you on the 20th. Right. So they could possibly make changes to something that impacts both aspects of the board and the commission.
So I would think that if we were going to, a board delegate, meaning one person, the executive committee, I think the executive committee makes more sense if I'm weighing in on.
And that depends on what the commission does. If they
do
approve
nothing,
it as drafted, then it's fine. We'll just get the signatures. But if not, we do need to have a mechanism in place.
Yep.
Tony, I have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
My reading of the strat plan doesn't indicate any goals budget-wise. Is that correct?
In terms of the goals section, no, there's no budgetary goals in that. But there is a section that does. I'm trying to think. No, I think you're right about that. Yes,
again, probably because it reflects a state-funded agency.
That's absolutely right. There is a section for other state agencies that deal with the appropriation process, but because we're self-funded, that doesn't apply to us. And yes, sir.
Okay, so if I were going to make a recommendation on a change, the one thing I would say is that in several of the goals, there's describe how your goal or action items support each statewide objective. The first one is account to tax and fee payers of Texas. I agree with that. The second one says efficient by producing maximal results with no waste of taxpayer funds and by identifying any function or provision considered redundant or not cost effective. And I would say that there aren't any taxpayer funds at stake, is fee payers.
Yes, sir. That text is directly from the template that we're required to use for the plan. I'm not sure if we could adjust that or not.
I would just like to say for the record that it is the appraisers and AMCs, the ratepayers,
yes,
who are funding this agency. That's all.
Not only, I mean, it's broader.
That's all I have.
Thank you, sir.
Is there a specific deadline that this needs to be approved by, or?
It needs to be submitted by June 1st. So an action taken by the board today, and then it goes before the commission, and they will look at it and take action. And then if there needs to be a follow-up meeting, depending on if it's delegated to the committees or not, the executive committees, they'll meet and hash out any recommendations at that point to move forward.
So today we are looking for a motion for approval, and before you there's 3 pieces of a motion. Depending on how you decide and if you're ready to make that motion, it seems to me that based on your conversation it would be that first piece and the third piece without the middle.
So if there are no other questions from Mr. Slagle, I will hear a motion.
A tough one.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the fiscal year 2025 through 2029 strategic plan as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes, and I further move that the board delegate final approval of the 2025-2029 strategic plan to the chair.
Okay, now we're going to get into Robert's rules, because I think that we...
No?
That's the motion. I mean, you need a second, and then you vote.
Do we have a second for the motion?
I second.
Ms. Sprinkle seconds the motion. Any further discussion? I would recommend that instead of delegating just the chair, that we delegate it to the executive committee.
Madam Chair, I move to amend my motion so that the delegation goes to the executive committee.
Can we amend, is that appropriate?
Is everyone, well, the cleanest way to do this is to let the vote fail and then start fresh.
Okay. All those in favor of Mr. Bolton's original motion, unamended motion, all those in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? No. The motion fails.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton.
I move that the board approve the fiscal year 2025 through 2029 strategic plan as presented, along with any technical or non-substantive changes. I further move that the board delegate final approval of the strategic plan to the executive committee.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mr. McAnally. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Bolton.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting us flex our Robert's rules. Agenda item number 18, discussion regarding the executive director's engagement in negotiations with the Texas Facilities Commission for new office space at 1501 Lavaca. Executive Director Buckholtz.
You can always tell when Tony's been at the pull it way down. After discussion with the executive committee, I bring this item to you for just informational purposes. And I think the reasons of that will be clear as I go on, but let me know if it's not. We received an assignment letter from the Texas Facilities Commission. That would mean moving from our current office space to a new office space in fiscal year 2028. This assignment letter will go before the commission later this month for a decision on whether or not to accept the assignment of new space. So this new space would be in a state-owned property currently under construction nearby at 15th and Lavaca. So it's where the cranes are currently working and the reason for all the current construction. It would allow us to downsize our footprint by a couple thousand square feet. It would save on rental costs, and it would have it would be a more modern space that reflects how we currently work. The Facilities Commission has funding to cover our moving expenses and our fixed furnishings, and has really made it quite easy on us to decide whether or not that this is a good thing for the agency. They have also quoted us a lease amount that would mean a reduction in rent. I'll tell you now that TREC pays about $175,000 annually in rent, and the board pays about $20,000 annually in rent. So this is several years away. It is outside of our current budget projections. Right now, the discussion you had was around the budget for 2025 with projections for 26 and 27. This move would happen at the beginning of 2028. But I wanted to bring it to you because it's important to me that we are all in agreement on a way forward. Because of the differential in lease amounts, the executive committee asked that we bring it to you so that you can provide feedback, but that it be something that the commission officially decides. A few things that I wanted you to be aware of. We will incur costs associated with this move, as one does, even if the military moves a family to new housing, and that family needs to buy new shelves, maybe a new piece of artwork, things like that, but it would be incidental in nature. I also want you to know that it appears that the building will have meeting space that it can accommodate meetings like this. It will look a little bit different than this. It might have less audience space, We do not yet know whether or not it's something that we would love, but if it's not the perfect space for us, there are additional options a block away at the Barbara Jordan Conference Center. The state is moving to a model where they have significant meeting space available in nearby buildings, but not creating conference centers in every building, essentially. The next steps are to enter into a memorandum of understanding with TFC, Texas Facilities Commission. That MOU is currently being reviewed by TREC's General Counsel. Our current lease expires at the end of 2026, which would mean we would need to renew for 1 year, or as long as construction extends, as we await the new space. And that is all if the commission votes later this month to accept that assignment of new space. So I'm happy to answer any questions for you, but I want you to be aware of this long-range project and of the potential consideration to move to that new space.
Chelsea, do you have an idea of the pulse of the TREC Commission as to whether they think this is a good idea or not?
Yes, I can't find a flaw with a potential move. And I have heard no downside and no opposition from the commission. More than anything, it's a little ambiguous as to how to move forward definitively and be sure that all decisions have been made so that we don't get 3 years down the line and we move in this direction and you have a commission that says, hold on, who made this decision? So I'm wanting to make sure that we just have thorough, robust conversations today so that we can go forward with confidence. But I see it as a good thing, and I don't expect the commission to see it any differently.
Just out of curiosity, does the commission, when they have their board meetings in this space, do they have quite a bit more audience members? I mean, I think we have zero.
Sometimes. The February commission meeting is always coordinated with a winter meeting for Texas Realtors.
Okay.
And we offer CE for attendance. And so miraculously, this room is quite full during that meeting. Other meetings are significantly less. But I will tell you that many watch this meeting and the commission meetings online. And I think the availability to stream that in real time means that people don't have to travel down here. So I think our audience is bigger than you might expect.
Yeah, after our last board meeting, the emails that I got, like, I was watching the board meeting today. I was like, oh, people are watching.
Yes, this is the only reason why I bug people to say move to the mic so that our actual audience can hear. Yeah.
Any questions for Executive Director Buchholz? Very good.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Agenda item number 19 is discussion and possible action regarding possible topics for the November workshop. Is there anything on anyone's short list that they would like to add? Do we have a list at all at this point? Yeah.
I think I have Robert's rules on that list.
Okay. So because today we will be scheduling a future meeting, would now be an appropriate time to make that decision about whether or not we have a workshop in November?
You can. I mean, it's really up to the board.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move that we do not have a workshop in November.
Does it need to be a motion?
Needs to be a decision of the board. If you're all unanimously in agreement, you could do that. But if you need a motion, then that mechanism's there.
We don't have any new board members.
What was the motion? I'm sorry.
That's the point.
To not have a workshop.
I think the workshops are quite effective, particularly for new board members that are rolling on. It was very, very helpful when I came on board. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah.
We don't have any new members. Yeah, since we don't. I agree with Chance.
You second the motion?
Well, they said we didn't need a motion. But I second the motion.
Well, since there was some opposition, then maybe we should take a vote.
Okay.
All those in favor of Mr. Bolton's motion to not have a,
Aye.
anyone opposed?
I oppose, I'll be the Long Ranger.
The motion passes. Did you get that? It was a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. For the record. Agenda item number 20, discussion and possible action regarding agenda items for future meetings. Of course, we have the budget next time around to approve. Anything else from anyone that needs to be noted? Okay, we will then schedule future meeting dates. So we previously set a date of August 16th. Wanted to make sure that that works for everybody. And November 14th and 15th, so we now can cross November 14th off of our no conflicts with those dates, confirming with everyone? The 14th?
August 14th, you said?
Sorry, August 16th?
Oh, I'm sorry.
And November 15th now, just the 15th. We can set a tentative date for the February board meeting. The 17th is President's Day, so that's a long weekend. TREC has their meeting on the 10th, so possibly February 21st, Friday, February 21st. Anyone have any conflicts with that as a tentative date? All right, the 21st it is. Let us know if something arises. Your ski trip should be on President's Day weekend. Yeah. Okay, if there's nothing else, before we adjourn today, I did want to say, wish Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. I hope that everyone enjoys some quality time with their family, and I think it sort of brings us back to where we started, to also think of the people who will be missing their mothers this Mother's Day. You know, especially the first Mother's Day is always a difficult one. So we will definitely be thinking about Dion's daughter on Sunday. The time is 11:14 and this meeting is adjourned.